cold as the granite altar behind him sliced through the expectant hush of the clearing. I, Ronan, Alpha of the Silverwood Pack, reject you. He did not look at me. His gaze was fixed on the ancient moonstone resting in its ceremonial cradle, his jaw a hard line of defiance against fate, against the elders, against me. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled pack, a wave of shock and disbelief. My heart, which had been hammering against my ribs with a frantic, hopeful rhythm, simply stopped. The world narrowed to the sight of his hand, still outstretched, not in acceptance, but in dismissal. As if in answer to his sacrilege, a thin, sharp crack splintered across the luminous surface of the moonstone, a sound like a soul breaking. Wait, before the next revelation unfolds, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. My feet moved before my mind could process the totality of my ruin. I was running, tearing myself away from the epicenter of my humiliation. The ceremonial white dress, a garment I had dreamed of wearing since I was a pup, snagged on thorns and branches, ripping as I fled. The sounds of the clearing, the frantic whispers, the authoritative bark of an elder trying to regain control, Ronan's sharp, commanding voice calling my name with a fury that belied his rejection, faded behind me. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away from the pitying eyes, the scornful sneers, the utter desolation of my life. I was Ilara, the Omega-born, the girl who should never have been presented at a Luna ceremony, the fool who had dared to hope. The forest floor was a treacherous blur of roots and shadows beneath my bare feet. Tears streamed down my face, hot and useless. Every gasping breath was a sob. For generations, the Moonstone had confirmed the sacred bond, the fated pairing of Alpha and Luna. It had never been wrong. Yet when my hand had hovered over its glowing surface, Ronan had recoiled as if burned. He had looked at me, truly looked at me for the first time all night, and his eyes held not the warmth of recognition, but a chilling void. He had chosen to break tradition, to defy the moon itself, rather than accept me. The pain was a physical thing, a clawing beast inside my chest. I had spent my life in the shadows of the pack house, quiet and unassuming. My parents were lost to a rogue attack when I was young, leaving me with no status, no one to champion my cause. Being called to the ceremony was a miracle, a whisper from the elders that perhaps my lineage was more than it seemed. For a fleeting week, I had been treated with a respect I had never known. Now, that respect had curdled into a spectacle of shame. I ran harder, fueled by a despair so profound it felt like rage. The familiar scent of Silverwood territory, of damp earth, pine, and belonging, began to thin. Ahead, I could see the skeletal forms of the ironwood trees that marked the border, the place no one crossed, the boundary with the Blackfang pack. For a century, our packs had been locked in a bitter feud, a cycle of raids and retribution that had bled both sides dry. To cross the border was to invite death, and in that moment, death felt like a mercy. With a final, desperate surge of energy, I burst through the line of gnarled trees, stumbling into a place that felt instantly alien. The air here was different, sharper, carrying the scent of frost and cold stone. I fell to my knees, my lungs screaming, my body trembling with exhaustion and grief. The forest here was darker, the shadows deeper, the silence more profound. This was it then, the end of my pathetic story. Let them come, let the enemy wolves find me, and finish what Ronan had started. I waited for the growl, for the snap of jaws, for the tearing of flesh. But there was nothing, only an unnerving, predatory stillness. Slowly, as my breathing quieted, I became aware of a presence. It was not the clumsy approach of a patrol. It was a singular, focused power that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I lifted my head, my tear-filled eyes scanning the oppressive darkness. He stepped out from behind a massive, moss-covered boulder, moving with a fluid grace that was utterly silent. He was tall, impossibly so, with broad shoulders that strained the seams of his dark leather tunic. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, long and unbound, and his eyes? His eyes seemed to hold the cold light of distant stars. There was no mistaking the raw, untamed authority that radiated from him. This was not just a Black Fang warrior. This was an alpha. I knew who he had to be. Kalen, the Black Fang Alpha. A ruthless killer, a monster from the cautionary tales told to Silverwood pups. I scrambled backward, my hands digging into the cold, damp earth. A whimper escaped my lips. He stopped a dozen paces away, his head tilted in a gesture of mild curiosity. He made no move to attack, no show of aggression. He simply watched me, his expression unreadable. His gaze swept over my torn dress, my bleeding feet, the tear tracks on my face. "The little dove has fled the nest," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate in the very air around me. It was not the guttural snarl of a beast, but the cultured, precise tone of a nobleman. It was more terrifying than any growl. "Stay away from me," I choked out, the words barely a whisper. A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. "You crossed onto my land, little dove. You are the one who has come to me." He took another slow, deliberate step forward. News travels on the wind. An Omega girl rejected at her own Luna ceremony. The moonstone cracked. Quite the scandal. Ronan always was a fool, led by his pride rather than his senses. He knew, of course he knew. The humiliation burned anew, fresh and raw. I pushed myself to my feet, swaying with a lightheadedness born of fear and exhaustion. I would not die on my knees. "Kill me and get it over with," I said, lifting my chin in a pathetic imitation of defiance. Kalen's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something, surprise, interest, in their depths. Death is a simple thing, a tidy end to a messy story. But I find your story has just become interesting. He circled me slowly, like a wolf assessing its prey. I stood my ground, trembling, my heart a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. The Silverwood elders must be in chaos. The prophecy of the fractured stone will send them scurrying into their archives. Ronan has shown a weakness they cannot ignore. He has defied destiny. A pack without a Luna, an alpha who rejects his mate. It is a pack ripe for the breaking. He stopped in front of me again, so close now I could feel the cold aura that radiated from him. I had to crane my neck to meet his gaze. He smelled of winter pine and old secrets. "I have no interest in killing you," he said softly, the words a stark contradiction to his fearsome reputation. "I have a proposition." I stared at him, bewildered. "A proposition?" "You are worthless to them now, a symbol of shame. They will either cast you out to die in the wilds or kill you quietly to erase the memory of this night. Your life in Silverwood is over. Every word was a cold, hard truth that I could not deny. But you possess something I need. Knowledge. Knowledge, I repeated, my voice hoarse. I'm an Omega. I know nothing. You know the layout of the dens, the patrol routes, the guard rotations. You know the elders. You know their vanities, their rivalries, their weaknesses. You have spent a lifetime being invisible, and invisible people see everything. His insight was unnervingly accurate. Ronan has handed me a weapon, a key to unlock his gates, and that key is you. The world tilted, the trees seeming to spin around me. What was he saying? Come with me, Kalen said, his voice dropping, persuasive and dangerous. I offer you sanctuary, my protection, food, shelter, safety from those who would see you dead. No one will harm you in my territory. In return, you will answer my questions. You will tell me everything you know about the inner workings of the Silverwood Pack. It was a devil's bargain. Betray my pack, the very people who had just utterly destroyed me, in exchange for my life? Become a traitor to save myself from the consequences of their cruelty? And if I refuse? I whispered, my throat tight with fear. Kalen's faint smile returned, but it held no warmth. Then I will leave you right here. The forest is deep, and my patrols are hungry. You will not survive the night. He extended a hand. It was not a gesture of comfort, but of contract. A choice laid bare in the heart of enemy territory. A swift, lonely death, or a life purchased with treason. I looked from his outstretched hand to the impenetrable darkness of the forest around me, the forest that was no longer my home. Ronan's face flashed in my mind, his cold eyes, his contemptuous sneer. The pack's whispers, the cracked moonstone. They had left me nothing. They had made me nothing. With a shuddering breath that felt like the last gasp of the girl I used to be, I placed my small, trembling hand into his. His grip was firm, his skin cool, and as his fingers closed around mine, I felt the chilling, irreversible certainty that I had just sealed my fate. Life in the Blackfang Den was a study in contrasts. Where Silverwood's halls were carved from warm, living wood and filled with the scent of hearth fires and baking bread, Kalen's fortress was a brutalist structure of black stone and iron built into the side of a mountain. It smelled of cold metal, curing leather, and the faint, ever-present scent of blood. The wolves here were different too. They moved with a silent, disciplined purpose, their gazes hard and assessing. They looked at me with open suspicion, this stray lamb brought into the heart of their lair. I was a ghost at their feasts, a shadow in their halls, a constant, unwelcome reminder of the world beyond their borders. Kalen installed me in a set of sparse but clean chambers high in the fortress. A guard was posted at my door day and night. It was, as he had promised, a sanctuary. It was also, undeniably, a prison. Our days fell into a strange, tense routine. Each morning, he would summon me to his strategy room, a vast, circular chamber dominated by a massive stone table carved with a detailed map of the surrounding territories. The walls were lined not with trophies, but with shelves groaning under the weight of scrolls, leather-bound books, and celestial charts. This was not the den of a savage warlord. It was the library of a scholar. "Tell me about Elder Maeve," he would begin, his voice calm, his fingers tracing the border between our lands on the map. "I know she controls the granaries. What does she covet?" At first, my answers were clipped, reluctant. I gave him scraps. Patrol times and supply routes I knew were changed weekly. I was a traitor, yes, but I would not be a good one. Kalen was endlessly patient. He would listen, his gaze never leaving my face, and then he would ask a different question, a stranger one. "The rejection ceremony," he said one afternoon, startling me. We had not spoken of it since that first night. "The moonstone, has it ever cracked before?" "Never," I whispered, the memory a fresh pang. "It is said to be as old as the moon itself." "And your family," he continued, his tone casual but his eyes sharp with intent. "You are Omega-born, you said. From what line?" I don't have one," I stammered. "My parents were just Ilara's parents. They died when I was a pup. They had no notable name." "No one is just anything, little dove," he murmured, turning to a dusty tome on a nearby shelf. He flipped through the brittle pages. "Every wolf has a lineage, a history. Yours seems to be a blank page. Convenient." His probing unsettled me. He seemed less interested in troop movements and more in the esoteric lore of my pack. He asked about birthmarks, old wives' tales, songs sung only in the nursery. He had me describe the pattern of the inlay on the ceremonial altar, the specific words of the incantation the elders chanted. It was a bizarre, frustrating line of questioning. I was a key, he had said, but I had no idea what lock he was trying to open. My resentment for him was a constant, simmering fire. He was my captor, using me for his own ends. Yet there were moments that chipped away at my certainty. He ensured I ate, even when the rest of the pack was on lean rations. When I fell ill with a fever, he personally brought me cool water and potent herbs, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he checked the heat of my brow. He never explained these kindnesses. They were just facts, as stark and unadorned as the stone walls of his keep. One evening, a commotion in the main hall drew me from my chambers. Ronan's second in command, a brutish, arrogant wolf named Fendrel, stood in the center of the hall, flanked by a dozen Silverwood warriors. They had been captured at the border. My blood ran cold. "Kalen!" Fendrel roared, straining against the two Blackfang guards who held him. "Give us the traitor! The Omega bitch has brought shame on our pack. The Alpha demands her return. She must face justice." Kalen descended the main staircase, his steps unhurried. He stopped on the last step, looming over the captured party. "Ronan sent you to issue his demands?" he asked, his voice laced with contempt. "How far the mighty have fallen." "She is under my protection. You will return to your whelp of an alpha and tell him that what is mine, I keep." "She is not yours," Fendrel spat. "She is a Silverwood Omega, a runaway disgrace." Fendrel's eyes found me then, standing in the shadows of the upper gallery. His lip curled into a sneer. "There you are, you little whore, hiding behind the skirts of your new master. Did you offer yourself to this beast to save your pathetic skin?" Before I could even flinch, there was a blur of motion. Kalen had crossed the distance between them in a heartbeat. He seized Fendrel by the throat, lifting the much larger wolf clear off the ground with one hand. Fendrel choked, his face purpling, his claws scrabbling uselessly at Kalen's arm. "You will address her with respect," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper that carried through the suddenly silent hall. "She is a guest in my home. Another insult, and I will send your tongue back to Ronan in a box." He dropped Fendrel, who collapsed to the floor, gasping and sputtering. Kalen looked at his guards. "Strip them of their weapons and send them back. Let them walk home with the sting of their failure." He turned his back on them, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and his eyes met mine across the hall. For a fleeting second, I saw something other than calculation in his gaze. A flicker of protective fire, and it confused me more than anything he had ever done. Later that night, he came to my chambers. I was sitting by the window, staring out at the moonlit peaks. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I nodded, not looking at him. "Why did you do that? Defend my honor? I have none." "Everyone has honor," he corrected quietly. "Some just have it beaten out of them." He stepped closer, coming to stand behind me. Fendrel's incursion was not sanctioned by the Silverwood elders. It was Ronan's own foolish pride. This is good. It shows a fracture in their leadership. His mind was always on strategy, on the great game. I turned to face him, my frustration boiling over. "Is that all I am to you? A piece on your board? A way to sow discord?" "You are my guest," he said, his face an impassive mask. "I am your prisoner," I countered, my voice rising. "You ask me questions I cannot answer about things that don't matter, while my old pack wants me dead and your pack wishes I would disappear. You saved me from the forest only to leave me to die of loneliness in this castle of stone." The words hung in the air between us, raw and painful. I expected him to be angry, to put me back in my place. Instead, his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "It is not my intention for you to be lonely," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But you are a mystery, Elara, a puzzle I must solve. Your rejection was not a simple act of a foolish alpha. It was a catalyst. The breaking of the moonstone, it was the fulfillment of a prophecy." My breath caught. A prophecy? An old one, known only to the alphas of the Blackfang line. "When the moon weeps and the bond is denied, the lost daughter shall return to her rightful side. The usurper's reign will crumble to dust, and the twin fangs will unite in trust." He recited the words as if he had known them his entire life. "The lost daughter," I whispered, my mind reeling. "I believe it refers to you." The idea was so ludicrous, so utterly impossible that I almost laughed. "Me? Kaelin, I am an Omega. My parents were nobodies. I am the furthest thing from a lost daughter of any importance." "And yet," he said, his gaze intense, "you were the one standing at that altar. You were the one Ronan rejected. You were the catalyst." He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from my face. His touch was like a spark on my cold skin. This is why I ask my strange questions. I am not trying to conquer Silverwood. I am trying to unravel a history that has been deliberately buried, a history that I believe begins and ends with you. He left me then, alone with the impossible prophecy and the bewildering, terrifying glimmer of a purpose I had never imagined. The stakes were suddenly higher than I could have ever conceived. My life was no longer just a story of rejection. It was part of an ancient song, and Kaelin, my enemy, my captor, my protector, was the only one who seemed to know the words. And I was beginning to fear that the price of learning the melody would be my soul. The prophecy hung between us, an invisible thread connecting our disparate worlds. I began to search my own memories, not for military secrets, but for the inconsistencies Kaelin had hinted at. I remembered the hushed tones of the elders whenever I asked about my parents, the way they would steer the conversation to the official story, a tragic, random rogue attack. I remembered a small velvet pouch my mother had given me, pressing it into my hand the day before she and my father left on their journey. "Keep this safe, my little moon petal," she had whispered. "Never open it until you feel truly lost." I had kept it hidden all these years, a forgotten memento. Now, Kaelin's words echoed in my mind. That night, I retrieved the pouch from a secret seam in my old traveling cloak. My fingers trembled as I loosened the drawstring. Inside was not a jewel or a coin, but a small, tarnished silver locket. It was plain, unadorned, the kind of thing an Omega might wear. I had never thought much of it, but now I examined it with new eyes, running my thumb over its smooth surface. I found it, a tiny, almost invisible catch on the side. With a click, the locket sprang open. On one side was a faded miniature portrait of a smiling woman with my eyes, my mother. On the other side, behind a thin piece of protective glass, was not a portrait of my father, but a single pressed flower. It was delicate, with 5 silver-white petals that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light. A moon petal. I knew the legends. Moon petals grew only in one place, the sunken glade, the most sacred ground of the Silverwood Pack, where the first Alpha was said to have been born. The glade was forbidden. Only those of the direct, original Alpha bloodline were permitted to enter. An Omega like my mother would have been killed for trespassing. The next morning, I did not wait for Kalen to summon me. I went to the strategy room, the locket clutched in my hand. I found him poring over a star chart, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Kalen," I said, my voice shaking. He looked up, his expression unreadable. I held out the open locket. He took it, his gaze falling upon the pressed flower. His breath hitched, the first unguarded reaction I had ever seen from him. He looked from the flower to my face, and a dozen emotions I couldn't name warred in his eyes. "My mother called me her little moon petal," I whispered. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the weight of it. "Your parents," he said, his voice strained. "They didn't die in a rogue attack, did they?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But they shouldn't have had this." "No," he agreed, his voice a low growl. "They shouldn't have, unless—" He left the word hanging in the air, pregnant with impossible meaning. He strode to a locked chest in the corner of the room, retrieving a heavy iron key from around his neck. He opened the chest and pulled out a rolled parchment, yellowed with age. He spread it carefully on the table. It was a genealogical chart, a sprawling family tree of the Silverwood Alphas. He pointed to a branch near the top. Alpha Valerius. He ruled 2 centuries ago. He had 2 sons. The eldest, Marcus, inherited the title. The younger son, Lycan, was a scholar, not a warrior. He fell in love with a healer from a mountain tribe. The pack disapproved. Lycan renounced his title, his name, his blood right, and left with her. They were declared dead, their names stricken from the records. He traced a finger down a faded, blotted line. They were your ancestors. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thin. "No," I breathed. "That's impossible. I'm an Omega." "A lie," Kalen stated, his voice ringing with certainty. "A lie told for generations to protect your line. Your parents knew the current elders were corrupt. Theron, the head of the council, he is a descendant of a rival family that has always coveted the Alpha title. Your parents must have known their lives were in danger. They hid you in plain sight, as an Omega, the last place anyone would look for the true heir. Heir. The word was a foreign country. Me? The quiet, invisible girl? Ronan, I stammered. Then his rejection? Was not his choice, Kalen finished, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. Theron and the elders arranged your presentation. They knew who you were. They forced Ronan to reject you publicly, to use his pride and his ambition against him. They needed to sever your claim in the most humiliating way possible, to ensure the pack would never accept you. The cracking of the moonstone wasn't a rejection of you. It was the stone itself crying out against the lie. It was all too much. My life, my identity, my greatest shame. All of it had been a carefully constructed deception. I swayed, gripping the edge of the table for support.
My entire world had been dismantled in the space of a heartbeat. But a new, chilling thought pierced through my shock. I looked at Kalen, truly looked at him, and saw the pieces click into place. His strange questions, his search for the lost daughter, his knowledge of the prophecy. "You knew," I whispered, the accusation tasting like ash in my mouth. "You weren't just guessing. You were looking for me." His jaw tightened. He did not deny it.
"My ancestors swore a pact with yours," he admitted, his voice low. "The Black Fang line was charged with watching, with protecting the true Silverwood heirs if the line was ever broken. The prophecy was our guide, passed from alpha to alpha." The air crackled with tension. The warmth of the revelation curdled into ice. "Protecting?" I asked, my voice rising with a hysterical edge. "Or using? The twin fangs will unite in trust. You don't want to restore me to my rightful place out of honor. You want to use my blood right as a weapon to destroy the Silverwood leadership from within, so you can pick up the pieces. You want to conquer my pack using me as your puppet queen." His silence was a confession. The sanctuary he offered was a gilded cage. The protection was the careful guarding of a valuable asset. The kindness? It was all manipulation. Every gesture, every soft word had been a lie designed to earn my compliance. The betrayal was a physical blow, more painful than Ronan's public rejection. Ronan had been a pawn, but Kalen was the player. Tears of rage and heartbreak streamed down my face. "You are no better than Theron," I spat, my voice trembling. "You both see me as a tool to be used for your own ambition. You are all monsters." "Elara," he began, taking a step toward me, his hand outstretched. "Don't touch me!" I shrieked, recoiling from him. "Don't you ever touch me again!" The hurt in my chest was a living thing, wild and savage. I had started to trust him. In the cold stone fortress of my enemy, I had started to feel a sliver of safety, of belonging. And he had just ripped it all away, revealing the cold, hard calculation beneath. I turned and fled. I ran from the strategy room, from the suffocating weight of his plans and his prophecies. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I could not stay. He had shown me the truth of my past, only to reveal the lies of my present. I found a small, unguarded postern gate at the back of the kitchens, a door used for tossing out scraps. I slipped through it and into the cold mountain air. I was free of my protector, my captor, my user. And I was completely, utterly alone, a lost heir with no allies, hunted by the pack that should have been my home, and betrayed by the one person who knew the truth. I was a queen with no crown, no army, and no kingdom. I was nothing but a ghost in a dying wood. The wilderness between the two territories was a harsh, unforgiving place. For days, I survived on nuts and berries, my instincts, long suppressed by my Omega upbringing, slowly waking. A new strength began to course through my veins. It wasn't the brute force of a warrior, but something deeper, a primal connection to the land itself. I could feel the life in the trees, the pulse of the water in the streams. It was the magic of my bloodline, dormant for a generation, now stirring to life in my desperation. I was no longer just Elara the Omega. I was something more. I was a survivor. I learned to mask my scent, to move like a shadow. I knew I couldn't hide forever. Theron's patrols would be scouring the woods for me, and Kalen's too.
I was a loose thread in both of their tapestries, and they would not rest until I was either woven back in or cut short. I couldn't fight them both. I needed an ally. But it wouldn't be Kalen, the manipulator. I remembered hushed conversations I'd overheard in the Silverwood kitchens, whispers about an old warrior named Gregor. He was the pack's weapons master, a traditionalist who had served my grandfather. He was fiercely loyal to the old ways and had openly disdained Theron's rise to power. He commanded the respect of a small but significant faction of the pack's warriors. If anyone in Silverwood would believe my story, it was him. Using the knowledge of the land that was awakening within me, I found one of the hidden message drops used by Silverwood scouts. With a piece of charcoal on a strip of birch bark, I wrote a simple message. The moon petal lives. The sunken glade at the next full moon. Come alone. I signed it with the sigil of the first Alpha, a symbol I had seen on the genealogical chart, a symbol no one but the true heir and a historian like Kalen would know. It was a terrible risk, but it was the only move I had. I spent the next week in a state of heightened tension, waiting for the full moon, unsure if my message had been found or if it was a trap. One evening, as I huddled in a small cave, a scent on the wind made my heart leap into my throat. Winter pine and cold stone. Kalen. He found me at dawn. He didn't come with a patrol of warriors. He was alone, his face etched with exhaustion. He stood at the entrance to my cave, not as a captor, but as a supplicant. He had laid his sword and knives on a rock a dozen yards away. He was unarmed. "I am not here to take you back," he said, his voice rough. "I am here to apologize." I remained silent, my hand resting on a heavy rock, my only weapon. "You were right," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "My duty to my ancestors, my obsession with the prophecy, it blinded me. I saw you as a symbol, a key, a means to an end. I failed to see the woman standing before me, a woman of courage and strength who had survived the unthinkable. I pursued justice with no thought for the person who deserved it most." He took a hesitant step forward. "My ambition corrupted an honorable duty. I am truly sorry, Alara." His sincerity was a palpable force. It chipped away at the wall of ice around my heart. But trust, once shattered, is not so easily mended. "Why should I believe you?" I asked, my voice cold. "Because I am no longer asking you to be my pawn," he said. "I am asking to be your sword. Let me help you claim what is yours, not for my pack, not for a prophecy, but for you." "I will pledge my warriors, my resources, my life to your cause with no expectation of reward. I will be your ally, if you'll have me." He looked down, a rare show of humility. "And if you will not, I will turn and walk away, and you will never see me again." Here was the decisive choice. The man who had betrayed me was now offering me everything. My own plan to contact Gregor was a long shot, a desperate gamble. Kalen offered an army, but it was more than that. In his eyes, I saw a man finally seeing me, not my bloodline. "Throwan's power is absolute," I said, testing him. "He controls the council and the Alpha. To challenge him is to invite a civil war." "Then we will not challenge him with armies," Kalen replied, his strategic mind clicking back into place, "but this time in my service. We will challenge him with the truth. We will break his power not with claws and teeth, but with the law. We force a conclave of truth." It was an ancient, almost forgotten tradition, a challenge that, if accepted, had to be answered in a sacred duel before the entire pack. It was a trial by combat, where the moon itself was said to judge the victor. He will never agree, I said. He will, Kalen countered, a flicker of his old dangerous confidence returning. Because you will issue the challenge. The lost heir, returned from the dead. His followers are loyal because they believe he protects the pack's stability. If he refuses a sacred challenge from the true bloodline, he will show himself to be a coward and a heretic. His power base will crumble. He will have no choice but to accept. The plan was audacious, terrifying, and brilliant. It would place me at the center of the storm, my life hanging in the balance. But it was my storm, my life. For the first time, I felt the stirring of not just survival, but of power. And Ronan? I asked quietly. Kalen's expression softened. He is a fool, but I do not believe he is evil.
He is a victim of Pharaon's manipulations as much as you are. The truth will be his judgment. I looked at this complex, formidable man, my enemy, my protector, my betrayer, and now my potential ally. I made my choice. Very well, Kalen, I said, stepping out of the cave and into the light. You have your alliance. We met Gregor at the sunken glade. The old warrior's eyes went wide when he saw me, and wider still when he saw the Black Fang Alpha standing at my side, not as a captor, but as a guard. I showed him the locket, told him the story. He listened, his weathered face a mask of stone. When I was finished, he dropped to one knee. "My Alpha," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "We thought your line was lost forever." With Gregor's loyalty secured, the plan was set in motion. He returned to the Silverwood Den to rally his faction, to sow the seeds of doubt against Theron. Kalen and I spent the next few days preparing. He trained me, not to be a brute, but to be a duelist. He taught me to use my smaller size to my advantage, to be quick and agile, to anticipate my opponent's moves. He was a demanding teacher, pushing me to my physical and mental limits. In our grueling sessions, a new kind of bond was forged, one built not on lies or prophecy, but on shared purpose and mutual respect. On the day of the new moon, we marched. It was not an army of invasion. It was Kalen and his 10 best warriors serving as my honor guard. And it was me. We walked through the Ironwood Forest and into Silverwood territory, not as enemies, but as petitioners. We arrived at the clearing, the same clearing where I had been rejected, to find the entire pack assembled. Gregor had done his work. Whispers of the lost heir had spread like wildfire. Theron and Ronan stood before the altar, their faces a mixture of fury and disbelief. I stepped forward, my voice clear and steady, ringing with an authority I never knew I possessed. "I am Ilara, of the line of Lycan, daughter of Alaric and Lyra, the true heir of the first Alpha. I have returned to claim my birthright." A shocked silence fell over the pack. "I accuse the elder Theron of treason," I continued, my eyes locked on the old wolf. "I accuse him of orchestrating the murder of my parents, of concealing my identity, and of manipulating this pack for his own power. I challenge him to a conclave of truth, to face my judgment and the judgment of the moon." Theron's face was a mask of cold fury. He was trapped. To refuse was to admit guilt. To accept was to face an unknown power he had tried so hard to extinguish. His pride would not let him back down. "I accept the challenge," he snarled. "I will gladly silence the ravings of this delusional Omega whelp and put an end to these lies." The circle was drawn. The pack formed a living wall around the dueling ground.
Kalen stood just outside the circle, his face impassive, but his eyes were fixed on me, a silent promise of support. Ronan watched from beside the altar, his expression a turmoil of confusion, guilt, and dawning horror. He was finally beginning to understand how he had been used. Theron transformed. His body contorted, swelling into the form of a massive, grizzled wolf with fur the color of iron and eyes that burned with malice. He was ancient, powerful, a beast of pure dominance. I did not have the mass or the age to match his wolf form, so I remained human, a slight figure in simple leather breeches and a tunic. In my hand I held a staff of ironwood, a gift from Gregor. The pack murmured. It looked like a lamb facing a lion. The duel began. Theron lunged, a blur of speed and fury, expecting to end it in a single brutal snap of his jaws. But I was ready. I used the staff to deflect his charge, sidestepping at the last moment. He was strong, but he was also arrogant, his movements predictable. I was faster.
The connection I had felt to the land now surged through me. I could feel the earth beneath my feet, solid and steady. I could feel the wind, a current I could use to my advantage. We danced a deadly ballet. He lunged and slashed, his claws gouging deep furrows in the earth where I had been a second before. I was not fighting him. I was fighting his momentum, his rage. I was a willow branch, bending but not breaking. He grew more and more frustrated, his attacks becoming sloppier, more reckless. "You are nothing!" he roared, his voice a guttural snarl that was half wolf, half man. "Your line was weak. It needed to be purged." "My line respected the balance," I countered, my voice calm as I vaulted over a swipe of his massive paws. "You crave only power. You broke the pact with the land. You weakened this pack with your ambition." I saw my opening. As he lunged again, overextending himself in his fury, I did not retreat. I dropped low, sweeping his front legs out from under him with the ironwood staff. The massive wolf crashed to the ground with a surprised yelp. In an instant, I was there, the sharpened end of the staff pressed against his throat. The clearing was utterly silent. I had won. I could have killed him. The law demanded it. But my bloodline was one of builders, not butchers. "The pack will have the truth," I said, my voice ringing out for all to hear. I began to speak, revealing things only the true heir could know. The secret location of the first Alpha's burial site, the true meaning of the carvings on the altar, the words of the ancient pacts. My words were the keys, unlocking the history Theron had tried to bury. As I spoke, the truth settled over the pack. I saw it in their eyes, the dawning recognition, the shame, the fury directed not at me, but at the wolf pinned beneath my staff. Finally, I looked at Ronan. "The choice was never yours, Ronan. You were a puppet. But now you have a choice. Uphold the law." Ronan stepped forward, his face pale. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a profound, soul-deep remorse. He looked at Theron with disgust, and then at me with a reverence that broke my heart for the man he could have been. "Theron of the line of Corvus," Ronan declared, his voice shaking but firm. "For the crimes of treason, murder, and sacrilege, you are stripped of your name and your rank. You are banished from these lands. If you ever return, you will die." He looked at me, at the Alpha I had become. I relinquish my claim. The pack belongs to its rightful Alpha." He fell to one knee, bowing his head, and around the clearing, one by one, the wolves of the Silverwood pack did the same. They knelt before me. My first act as Alpha was not one of consolidation, but of revolution. I stood before my pack, Kalen now at my side, and formally proposed a treaty of alliance with the Blackfang pack, ending the century of bloodshed. There were murmurs of shock, of protest, but the respect I had earned in the duel silenced them. They had trusted Theron's hatred for a generation. Now they would trust my hope. Kalen accepted with a solemn nod, sealing the pact not with a handshake, but with a shared glance of two sovereigns who understood the price of peace. Months passed. The alliance held, strengthened by shared patrols and mutual respect. Theron was never seen again. Ronan, humbled and seeking redemption, became a quiet but loyal captain of the guard, his service a silent daily apology. One evening, I stood on the high cliff that overlooked the valley, a vantage point that had once marked the edge of my world. Now it was the center. Below, the lights of two dens, Silverwood and Blackfang, glimmered in the twilight, no longer the camps of enemies, but the towns of neighbors. I heard his footsteps behind me, the familiar, silent tread. Kalen came to stand beside me, our shoulders almost touching. We watched the valley together in comfortable silence. We were not fated mates in the way of the Moonstone, bound by a magic we couldn't control. We were something different, something rarer. We were partners, forged in betrayal and battle, bound by a choice made in the cold light of day. "The prophecies are fulfilled," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble beside me. "The twin fangs will unite in trust." "We make our own prophecies now," I replied, looking up at him. The man who had once been my greatest fear was now my most trusted confidant. He smiled, a true warm smile that reached his starlit eyes. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was firm, his skin cool, but it no longer felt like a contract. It felt like coming home. As the full moon rose, casting its silver light over the peaceful valley, our clasped hands created a single shadow on the stone beneath our feet, a new symbol for a new kingdom, born not from a legend, but from the ashes of a rejection.